Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Emily Greenslit is a DONA International certified birth doula who is passionate about maternal health equality. She believes that all birthing people should have access to perinatal care and support and strives to foster a nurturing and inclusive birth environment. Emily is currently completing her Master's of Public Health at Tufts University School of Medicine, and her research is centered in reducing maternal mortality rates in the U.S. Emily is dedicated to providing accessible and comprehensive care. She understands that birth is a holistic experience and utilizes her yoga teacher training to support mothers both physically and mentally. She believes that birth should be an empowering experience and will always advocate for the birthing person's autonomy. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'm excited to chat.
Hey, Madison. Thank you for having me on. I am also excited.
Yeah. So Emily and I were talking actually last night, scheduling all of this, y'all, and figuring out like what are we going to talk about, because birth and postpartum obviously go hand in hand, but figuring out like what aspect of it we wanted to tackle, because I do try to pick like specific topics to kind of tackle. And it was tricky to figure out one because there's so many options.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know there are no shortage of things to talk about when it comes to perinatal care, but
Absolutely. Yeah, but I'm excited because we decided to tackle like those early postpartum days, like hours and days. So like talking about postpartum in the hospital. So Emily, you get to like be there during the birth and sometimes for a little while afterwards. I've also done postpartum shifts in the hospital with families before as well. So we're kind of going to talk about like those first few days, what to expect, everything's going to obviously be different from like hospital to hospital and birth to birth, obviously, but kind of giving some opportunity for people to kind of think about what it might look like when they're in the hospital. So, yeah, I'm excited. Do you want to start first by telling everybody a little bit about like you and how you got into the world that you're in now? And then we'll dive into it.
yeah, of course. So my name is Emily, and I am a DONA International certified birth doula. And I do have some postpartum experience, and I do postpartum work, but it is primarily births that I do these days. My undergrad was in nothing that had to do with birth or women's health, but I always really loved the idea of doing something with women's health, but I didn't want to necessarily be pre-med. But growing up, my mom was really involved with the Leche League. And after I graduated college, I kind of went down the whole birth work rabbit hole. And I was like, oh my goodness, why did this not enter into my head earlier? So, and then, yeah, pretty much that summer, I took my DONA training and then haven't looked back. And since being certified at through DONA, I also have my 200-hour yoga teacher training through
Wow.
Down Under School of Yoga, and fingers crossed, I'm hoping to do a prenatal training this fall.
Ooh, fun.
Yes, and I'm also getting my MPH at Tufts School of Medicine with a focus in maternal health.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that you've kind of taken this like alternative route to like typical med school medicine typed things, which is so cool. And I love that like you've had such an influence from your mom and like the experience that she had. And, it just shows that there's so many options out there, to find your special little chunk in the world or your special little place in the world of what you're good at and what you want to do.
100%. And I know we can both relate to this, but you know, birth work is so emotional, and I personally love that it's not as clinical as maybe like traditional medical healthcare might be. It is really nice to have to get to work on that emotional connection with a client.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
it's
But
so
again,
nice.
I knew you can relate to that 100%.
Yes, totally. And I think for clients too, like it's so nice for people that are going through this emotional experience to have someone there that understands what they're going through, understands the medical terminology in a way, like having a birth doula around, or a postpartum doula too, I guess. But we're able to like kind of decipher that like medical wording of things, especially when it comes to birth and when you're on like a bit of like a time stamped kind of thing, or doctors are saying that you need to do XYZ. It can be really nice to have somebody there to be like, well, no, you don't have to do that. You can do this instead. And that goes into like early postpartum days as well, right? Pediatricians telling people that, this or that is normal, or pushing this type of intervention or that type of intervention. And having a support system around is great. I actually have a client that I was just working with who baby was dropping weight when they first got home. And so the doctor was saying, we're going to have you come in for a weight check in a couple days. And she explained to them that she not only had an overnight postpartum doula, but a daytime postpartum doula who was also a lactation consultant. And so the doctor said, oh, okay, you've got support then. You can come back in a week instead for the weight check, because he was like, most people don't have that support around them. And so having that support sometimes can be better than the typical medical professionals. Because we do the same thing over and over, 15 to 30 times a year or more. Um, so we experience the things that people are experiencing maybe once a year, many times a year.
100%. It's true. We do, although we might not be as well versed in medical jargon as an OB, it is
Of
something that we
course.
are constantly exposed to. We're constantly, hearing things like vernix, fundal massage, or like, and the average person might not be hearing those terms every day.
Absolutely.
And it definitely helps to be so familiar with.
Yes. Yeah, and because we go over these things so many times, in postpartum world, I'm talking a lot with clients when they're like, "Wow, you're really good at swaddling." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I do this like many times a day, every single
Right.
day, and with tiny babies over and over all year long, right?" And like you just said, like you hear these words and these medical terminologies a lot more than the average person would, and that's what makes us, I think, great resources to help people kind of prepare or while they're going through it to understand it. So I mean, that kind of pulls us right into it. Like, what kind of stuff happens at this hospital that you're seeing all the time, or happens in these early postpartum days? Like, do you want to take us through like the process, I guess, of like you just gave birth to your baby? Like, what kind of happens?
Sure. Oh man, yeah, absolutely. So I think it makes sense maybe to start with a good typical vaginal birth because
Yeah,
it is definitely different if there is a C-section. Um,
absolutely.
but if someone gives birth vaginally, really the first thing that's happening on the medical team's part is that the baby is being assessed, checking vitals, all of that important stuff. And things that happen pretty quickly are vitamin K shots, eye drops, the Apgar score. Um, and those are optional things like especially well speaking specifically about vitamin K and eye drops, they are highly recommended, but if a birthing person has a question or a concern about any of those procedures, I'm big, and I'm sure you are too, on informed consent. And so
Yeah,
we always encourage the birthing person or their partner to talk to the doctor, the OB, whoever is on call, and make sure that they understand 100% what is happening to their
yeah,
baby and to them. Um, and again, there are pros and cons to all of these procedures, and there are some that are necessary, and then there are some that might not necessarily be needed.
right.
Um, but yeah, that's what happens pretty immediately. As far as what like as a doula, what I think is one, if not the most important thing to happen after birth is skin to skin.
Right.
Getting baby into the birthing person's arms immediately is ideal. And and in case listeners aren't aware of this, typically we don't like to wash a baby off immediately. We usually wait at least 24 hours, maybe 2 days before actually giving the newborn baby a proper bath, because vernix and all that other good gunk on there can really help the baby acclimate, is really great for their immune system. And having mom's bacteria mingle with baby's bacteria is so key. And again, that's why that skin to skin is so important. I mean, it is for a slew of reasons, but
Of
to get the
course.
oxytocin flowing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think that a lot of that, like you said, like some people may know about it, right? Like you see that like white like layer on babies, that
Right.
vernix, right? Or they have these like blood on them or different things and like all of these different, bodily fluids. And some people wouldn't think that you would be leaving that on, right? Especially if it's your first baby and you're not well versed in like, these types of interventions and these types of births, and maybe you're not surrounded by infants or pregnant people. Maybe you did or didn't take a birthing class or something like that. You often might not know these things. So I think that that's great that we're kind of acknowledging that and sharing that with people. And, there are typically, this is obviously we're talking about like the safe, no intervention, nothing's going on with baby or with mom that's medically necessary and like that we need to intervene on. And also to say that like as doulas, we aren't medical professionals, but we're seeing this very often, like we mentioned. So being able to kind of walk someone through what it might look like for them is, I think, really, really exciting and helpful to some people. So that's great. I love that you shared that. So, after baby's delivered, they've kind of done any immediate interventions for medical things for baby, and they're holding baby. What kind of other things need to happen? I know that a lot of people don't know that like a placenta needs to be delivered. Do you want to kind of like walk people through that and like what happens down there and with everything after baby comes out? Because there's more than people realize.
Absolutely. I probably should have said that initially, but
It's
yes, there
okay.
is, of course there is the placenta, which is providing the baby with nutrients all throughout pregnancy. And that is, fun fact, it's the only organ that we grow after we're born. Like, we have all
So
of our
cool.
organs, but so that's the only one. Which is, yeah, which is pretty cool. But so the placenta birth happens anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes to maybe 30 minutes after the baby is born. And it isn't painful usually, because unlike the baby, there aren't any bones in the placenta. Um, and some people describe it as like feeling like a big blood clot coming out.
Yeah.
And and especially because at this point, if mom is holding the baby, there is so much oxytocin, which is the
Right.
love hormone flowing, that a lot of times like the placenta birth, mom isn't like really super paying attention to it.
Right.
As she should be. It's baby and mom time, of course.
Right. And now with this placenta birth, I guess my two questions for people that may have, or speaking for people who may not know, would be, during this, wait time between baby being born and this placenta being born. Now, is baby still connected? When does that cord get cut? And then also, when that's being birthed, is mom pushing for that, or is that something that typically providers are kind of like pulling out for them?
Right. Yeah. So with cord clamping, sometimes the cord is cut pretty instantly, and for a while in the medical community that was considered the best practice. But now it's often believed, and there is scientific evidentiary support to
Yep.
back this up, that delayed cord clamping can have a lot of benefits to baby. that increased blood flow is really great for baby's health. And yeah, basically getting all that, as much blood as possible into baby. Um, so the cord clamping, it can be instant, but I think oftentimes there are a few minutes that go by before the cord is cut. Um, and then the placenta, I guess it is like it is sort of a push, like as it's coming out. The OB's hands aren't, unless there is an issue. The OB's hands shouldn't be like inside of the person giving birth when the placenta comes out. Um, and again, it is far less effortful than
Right.
actual, again, like there are no bones. It really isn't painful. Um, but yeah, does that kind of kind of
Yeah,
address
that's great. Yeah,
yeah, okay.
absolutely. Yeah, so I think that that's so cool to know. Like, it's not as much of a effort pushed out situation.
Definitely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that will answer like just some of the questions that people might have as they're listening if they're not, like I said, well versed in this kind of like world. Um, so all of that happens, and now do you want to explain to people like what a lot of people call like the golden hour, and then kind of what happens beyond like this next few hours, what kind of things people can expect? Are they going to be alone? Are there going to be typically people coming in and out? What kind of things will they be looking for and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. And I think before we get into the glory of that, yeah, like you said, the magic hour, I think I would be it would be wrong of me to exclude the fundal massage. I think
Yes.
we have one more less fun thing before we get to the fun stuff, but the fundal massage happens after the placenta birth, and it is massage is a generous way to describe it, but it is the provider basically pressing down on the uterus and expunging blood. And it is important. It does prevent hemorrhaging, but it can be really uncomfortable or almost painful. And I think it's not talked about enough. I've had clients who've been pretty blindsided finding out that that is something that they um, do have to go through, and and that it is something that is uncomfortable and even painful. So I think it can be good just to be prepared and know that that is coming. And it might not be painful for you. It might just be a little bit uncomfortable, but I think that's something that's less known typically in birth.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great thing to mention. I knew it happened, but I didn't know when in the timeline it did. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's definitely something that, as a birth doula, knowing that people are kind of blindsided by it, then I'm sure that there's a lot of people that feel blindsided by it. So that's great that you were able to kind of like mention that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But anyway, moving on to that glorious golden hour, that magic hour. So that is really when baby and mom and birth partner, if they are there, are able to be together and really just soak in, again, that I keep mentioning oxytocin, the love hormone, but you really can't underestimate that. Like it's
Right.
huge, and there are these, you can practically see like the love flowing between everybody during this time. But yeah, so skin to skin, um baby baby's skin being directly on mom's skin, um that is really key. It regulates skin temperature and heart rate for baby and mom. It's a huge bonding time. um Skin to skin also helps baby sort of start to make its way to the nipple. That's pretty big too. That's where breastfeeding can start. And breastfeeding, if the birthing parent chooses to do so, can start really anywhere from like 20 to 30 minutes after the birth. If that would be, probably the soonest as it would happen. But yeah, really as soon as the baby kind of becomes aware of and then acquainted with the nipple, that is when that can happen. Um, yeah. And
That's
it is,
awesome.
again, I really can't stress how key this time is for baby bonding, for for the partner to bond with baby and mom. And this might be a time where medical professionals might not be super involved, if things like the APGAR and baby's weight and eye drops and everything, if that's already been discussed and taken care of, then this would be the time that baby, mom, and partner would be together.
Yeah. I love how it can be so chaotic and so overwhelming, but then all of a sudden it's just this silence, right? Or like this quiet, peaceful time. And like you said, it really is the time for them all to bond. And like that breastfeeding and that initial breastfeeding moment is something that is just so crazy that you think about. Like I had a client the other day say to me, like, this is a tiny human. Like they shouldn't know anything, but then they come out knowing exactly what to look for. Like moms often don't know how to breastfeed because it's not something that's talked about or seen a lot in society nowadays. So they're just, oh my gosh, I have to figure this out. And here's baby, like ready to go. This instinct is absolutely insane. And some people will even see that, like, if you lay baby on the belly, that they'll like almost army crawl to the nipple to eat. And like, just these instinctual things, it's absolutely like mind blowing to see.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It it can be really helpful both in labor and then also in the postpartum period to remind yourself that baby knows best. Like baby is so unbelievably smart. And I totally agree, it is this tiny human who's so new to the world, but that instinct is undeniably there.
Yes.
And it's yeah, it's incredible
It's
for sure.
so cool. Awesome. So throughout these next like few hours, you're in a hospital, you're bound to have people in and out, right? And I mean, I guess that goes for the next like few days. I guess we could start with, you know, what are people and like medical professionals typically coming in and out for? Do you want to like explain a little bit about maybe if you have any pros and cons or like benefits to sending your baby to the nursery if there is the opportunity for that? And then also like what timeline are we looking at typically with people being in the hospital for before they get to go home?
Yeah, for sure. If there is a vaginal birth, and there aren't any complications, then I would say the hospital stay could be like on average 24 to 48 hours. In the event of a C-section, it might be closer to like 48 to 72 hours. Um, and if there are complications, then the stay might be a bit longer. Um, and as far as who is coming in or who you might interact with, the nurse that's on staff, it will help with feeding. That is something that will happen. Hospitals do typically have IBCLCs, lactation consultants, um, and and if one is on call, then the IBCLC might help with feeding as well. Um, but I think more often than not, I see a nurse typically helping, um, showing mom different feeding positions, talking through latch. Hopefully, they should be talking about hand expression. That is
Right?
definitely helpful to understand. Um, we do encourage people who want to breastfeed to buy breast pumps before giving births, just so they get acquainted with the pump and can have practice using it, like just yeah, really getting acquainted with it. And if they do have that, then that could be something that the nurse could potentially help with. I do think it should be stated that nurses are not lactation consultants,
Right.
and they do, have some a basic understanding of breast and bottle feeding, but unless they've undertaken lactation consultant training, they're not inherently experts in
Right.
that field. Obviously, nurses are incredibly adept and they know what they're doing, but I do think that is important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I do
yeah.
think that you typically get like you get different information from every person you're going to talk to, especially in the lactation world. And I think that most people will see a lactation consultant at least once before they leave the hospital. And if you haven't, nag them because they'll definitely send you one. Um, the only times I've actually had patients, clients come home and said that as a patient, they didn't see a lactation consultant was if they gave birth to a baby on like a late Friday night and they went home before like Monday morning or something like that. Sometimes there aren't IBCLCs or any type of a lactation consultant on call during that weekend or present during the weekend, and so it can be trickier. But like you said, nurses see it a lot, so they're able to give some input, but they may not be able to troubleshoot or support in different ways or explain things in specific ways in which a lactation consultant would be able to. Um, and I always urge clients, like when you get home, check out your insurance beforehand too, and maybe get some names of some lactation consultants. But a lot of them will be covered by insurance, at least one postpartum visit, or even like work sometimes will reimburse for people. So definitely to check that out because that can be really helpful as well. But yeah, I think that's great to know. Like people are going to be kind of, coming in lactation wise, and the timelines, and obviously, C-section stuff is going to be different timelines as well. And not only for being in the hospital, but it's also important to remember that if you give birth vaginally, your milk sometimes will come in faster than if you have a C-section. So navigating that as well and figuring out like all that jazz can be a bit of a Tetris game.
Totally. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So do you want to kind of tell people, I guess, reverse back a little bit to if somebody is experiencing or having a C-section, and then they have baby. So baby was taken out, typically, correct me if I'm wrong, like partner and baby will often, kind of get out of the OR and they'll stitch mom up and then she goes into a room and then they'll kind of be reconvened all together. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I've seen
Yeah,
done. I think that is pretty standard practice. And again, it I guess it could be, or it is circumstantial, but I think, yeah, that would be pretty
right.
standard. Um,
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
cool. And then typically, in most cases, if it's a healthy C-section delivery, my understanding also is that, you kind of end up getting to do the same stuff that you would after a vaginal delivery, when it comes to bonding and like the recovery. The big thing I see, and if you think of anything else, feel free to share, but the big thing I see of a difference between a C-section and a vaginal delivery postpartum is one, mamas are often like coming down out of all the anesthesia and different things from C-sections. So a lot of mamas will say that like the first few hours with their baby are very blurry, or like trying to come out of that and like understand things and then also needing extra support. So like during that first few hours for sure, but then also, not being able to move and be as mobile or able to lift your baby out of that bassinet. So needing definitely, a support person of some kind or a nurse to come in to help with the positioning and moving of baby, is something that I typically hear are the two big differences between, the struggle of that C-section recovery versus, that postpartum vaginal delivery recovery. Do you think there's anything else that you notice that's different between the two, like how those first few days are handled?
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. As far as kind of, yeah, coming down from the medication. Um, and Yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing that I've observed from C-sections. And as far as the actual birth environment, the OR is very sterile and pretty quiet during the birth, which might be unexpected for some people. Just how bright it is in there, and there are certain smells that you might not be expecting.
Right,
Um, but there are certain comfort measures that can be taken to sort of make that process feel a bit more comforting. Um, some people do actually want a clear curtain in front so they can
right,
see the baby coming out, and but that might not be preferable for some people who are giving birth.
right,
But if all is going according to plan and there aren't any complications, then skin to skin and breastfeeding should be able to happen pretty quickly, for sure. And as far as yeah, the next few days. So the procedure itself shouldn't be painful, but there can be pain in the days after. Um, so that is just something to be aware of. It's a major surgery. And like you said, there's less mobility for sure. And then the hospital stay will be a bit longer. But mom, again, as long as there aren't any other complications, mom should be fully with it and lucid. Not that she's not lucid during the surgery, but completely with it within, yeah, about a few hours. And typically mom is put into a room after the surgery and then moved to another space, like the actual postpartum
Right,
suite,
right.
where she could be a bit more comfortable with baby and partner.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for going over that because I do think that like it's important to know the difference whether you're planning to have a C-section or not. It's also just good to know what that's going to be like or what the opportunity would what opportunities you do have if you have to end up having a C-section. So you can kind of mentally prepare for that as well. Um, and so I think that that's great to share, and I appreciate that. Um, you know, it seems like in those few days after, it really is a case by case situation, right? We could totally sit here for the next 4 hours and talk all about the different options, but it really is a case by case, and I think that's why there's so much importance in making a birth and a postpartum plan to like know and expect what you want and be able to make sure that that's possible. And if it's not, being able to have, like you said earlier, that informed consent so that whatever measures are being taken is something that you can understand and be confident with making that choice. So I think that's so huge. Um, yeah. Is there anything else you can think of that people typically don't know about or think about in those first like bit postpartum, right after birth to like going home? Is there anything that you can think of within those first few days that people, should know about that you would want to share with the listeners?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I'm sure that there are, like you said, we could probably talk about this for many, many hours. I think, because we were talking about breastfeeding, this is kind of at the forefront of my mind. Um, it's just kind of cool to know about breast milk and how it changes. Um, the first breast milk that a baby gets is called colostrum, and it's super concentrated and kind of referred to as liquid gold. Just stuffed with good stuff, good nutrients for the baby, and then that milk changes to transitional milk, and then it changes to the sort of like regular milk. But it's breast milk is really, really changing every hour. It's and is totally adapting and responding to baby and mom, which is super cool. And again, like we can go into depth about that, I'm sure, but that's just something that I personally think is really interesting. And if a birthing person is interested in breastfeeding, that can just be a really cool and exciting rabbit hole to go down. um yeah, and I mean, of course, I always recommend talking with a lactation consultant because they're amazing and so helpful. um but yeah, oh gosh, what? I don't know. Is there anything
That's all
else that
right.
you're thinking
No,
of?
all good. I know
Yeah.
there's so many things that we could definitely, like you say, rabbit hole on, but I think that we were able to kind of touch upon some of the important parts here. So thank you. I appreciate it. If you want to share with listeners like where they can find you and what kind of services you provide the community, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. My website is emilyruthbirths.com. My Instagram and Facebook handles are at emilyruthbirths. And I do both birth and postpartum work. And starting very soon, I will be offering one-on-one yoga sessions, prenatal yoga sessions with clients. So really exciting.
Awesome. I'll definitely have all of Emily's information below in the show notes, so definitely check it out and head over if you are interested in working with her. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Madison.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.